hijacked plane is just seconds or minutes away from the Pentagon. This will be the second attack on Capitol Hill tonight, not to mention two on the World Trade Center already. Back to CNN.
Another couple of pieces of information out as we continue to put this all together into a straight line if we can. The United Nations has been evacuated. The United Nations building on the east side of Manhattan has been evacuated. The city is in, this is election day, a primary election for mayor and city council races here in New York. That election has been postponed until further notice. Obviously, we are in the middle of an extraordinary catastrophe that started about 8:45 Eastern Time here in New York when one plane crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. About a half an hour after that, as people were converging, as fire and police and rescue teams were converging on the scene, a second plane appeared to the west of the Trade Center buildings and slammed into the second tower. That's what you just saw. Fire shooting out the north and east side of the tower. Shortly after that, we began to get reports of events taking place in Washington. An explosion which first came to us as a fire at the Pentagon. Now there's a report of a second hijacked plane heading towards the Pentagon. It is believed that one of the planes, perhaps both, but one of them we have been told was an American Airlines 767 that hit one of the Trade Center towers. About a half an hour after that, perhaps a little bit longer, lose track of time a little bit in these situations, the first tower, or let me correct that, the south tower, the second tower, the one to the left collapsed. It collapsed in a cascade of smoke and spark, and what we cannot tell you is if there was a second explosion that caused that collapse or if it was simply, that's the first one, that's the south tower collapsing. And that was about a half hour, give or take, after the planes hit the tower. Then shortly after that, just as the smoke was starting to clear away, the second tower, and that's what you're looking at now. Again, this was not very long ago, 10, 15 minutes ago, the second tower. It almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see, except there is nothing controlled about this. This is devastation. How many people? There are 50,000 people who normally go to work in the Trade Center buildings. How many of those people had arrived already? How many of those people were trapped on the upper stories? How many of those people have been hurt? How many of those people died? We cannot tell you now. We can tell you that hospitals throughout the New York area are receiving literally hundreds of patients. And they are performing triage. They are trying to figure out who can be treated, who needs help first. This is sort of standard operating procedure. We are just being told now that Israel has evacuated all its diplomatic missions around the world. Israel has evacuated its missions. We are told now that Yasser Arafat has condemned these attacks, and we don't know yet who's behind them. Britain has condemned these attacks. Germany has convened its National Security Council, and we will check and see if events are going on in those places or if that is simply a reaction to what has gone on here in Washington and in New York. CNN's Gene Reserve joins us on the phone from Washington. Gene.
Hay Street, which is one of the major thoroughfares here in Washington, it is absolute gridlock. It takes about 15 minutes to drive one block. Ordinarily, this time of day, there'd be nothing near this kind of traffic. You see pedestrians filling the sidewalks, many of the businesses and offices here having closed. You see cars absolutely pouring out of the parking lots, contributing to the absolutely horrendous traffic situation. Many people trying to use their cell phones. However, cell phone service has become very difficult in this town because of the crush on circuits. For the most part, people appear to be very calm and collected. I will tell you, though, that as I drove, I looked at the car next to me full of some young women who I would guess were in their 20s, several of them crying their eyes out, obviously very upset as they listened to the radio and heard the news of what is happening in this city in New York also. Aaron, back to you.
Gene, thanks. Gene Reserve in Washington this morning as she and the rest of The organization continues to gather what facts we can, what facts are available in the wake of the extraordinary chaos that has followed this extraordinarily horrendous terrorist attack. American Airlines, we are told, one of the planes involved in this was a hijacked American Airlines 767 out of Logan Airport in Boston. American Airlines will say what is known. What is known as you look at the White House being evacuated a short time ago, or is that live? And I'm not sure on my monitor which it is. I believe it's taped from a short time ago. In any case, American Airlines will talk to reporters in about a half hour or so, 11:30 Eastern Time. One of its planes involved in this, and we will bring that press conference to you live when it happens. Here in New York, hospitals are being overwhelmed. As hundreds of patients are being brought in and being treated. We cannot tell you, we would not even begin to guess what the numbers in this will be, how many people will have died by the time this day is over, how many injuries have taken place in both Washington and New York. But as former police commissioner Howard Safer told us a few moments ago, obviously the numbers are going to be extraordinary. Who do we have on the phone, guys? Just help me out here. Patty, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
What do you got?
About an hour ago, I was on the corner of Broadway and Park Place. That's about 1,000 yards from the World Trade Center when the first tower collapsed. It was a massive explosion. At the time, the police were trying desperately to evacuate people from the area. When that explosion occurs, it was like a scene out of a horror film. People started stampeding away from it.
Patty, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We told you there was a second plane that went down, this one around 80 miles or so southeast of Pittsburgh. We'll try now to connect with KDKA TV in Pittsburgh. Well, just so much for planning. We will try again. We have reports that a plane has crashed in the Pittsburgh area, southeast of Pittsburgh, about 80 miles. And at varying times, we've heard that this was a 767 and a 747. I'm not sure it matters which it is. What matters is that a plane has crashed in the Pittsburgh area. The Pentagon continues to monitor reports that another plane, a hijacked plane, is headed for that area. All flights have been canceled around the country. International flights heading towards the United States are being diverted into Canada this morning. Patty, let me go back to you as we look at some tape from the ground. Patty, why don't you go ahead and continue?
Okay, Aaron, I'm in the main building of Pace University, which is inside the fallout zone of all the debris from the two building collapses. At the time of the first building collapse, that was at Broadway and Park Place. There was a huge cloud of smoke. It overcame the crowd. People were stampeding. Literally, the debris was so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. I ducked around into a building that was on Park Place and Beekman Street. When I was in there, people were coming in. They were crying. They were wailing. You couldn't see anything outside. After the smoke had cleared a little bit, I came outside. The scene was like a ghost town in the financial district, very eerie. You saw people being wheeled on gurneys away from the site of the explosion. People were coming out with masks over their face, anything they could put over their face, because the air was still very thick with debris. The ash on the ground is at least 2 inches thick. It's more like snow cover, a very eerie snow cover blanketing downtown Manhattan right now. Now, at the time, I was back on the corner again of Broadway and Park Place. At that time, the police started running toward us, telling everybody to move who was left on the street. I looked up, and that's when I heard the, pardon me, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down. Again, whoever was left on the street started stampeding. I'm in the office. Right now, I'm in the main building of Pace University. People are crying. They have gas masks on their face. Authorities are making people go toward the basement. They're just doing anything that they can to move people away from the financial district. But again, it is a very horrifying scene down here, very eerie, like a ghost town.
Patty, let me interrupt you. Mayor Giuliani is on the telephone, is part of New York One's coverage. We join our affiliate for that.
Mayor Giuliani, since we have New Yorkers listening, and obviously their thoughts are with the people who are down there.
Urge them to remain calm, to remain at home, or to remain at their place of business, unless they're in Lower Manhattan. By that I mean south of Canal Street. If you're south of Canal Street, get out, walk, and walk slowly, carefully. There are plenty of police around, but just walk directly. If you can't figure out what else to do, just walk directly north. That'll get you out of the dangerous smoke area. It'll also do us a big favor. It'll open up those streets because we're going to be moving a large number of ambulances and emergency personnel in and out of there all day. I've talked to the governor. He is putting the National Guard on alert so that they can relieve our police officers and our firefighters later this afternoon. And we've asked the federal government for help from the Urban Search and Rescue Team. So right now, we're using all of our police and firefighters and emergency personnel to help the people down there. Later on, we're probably going to need reinforcements.
Mayor Giuliani, I realize that it must be more than a chaotic situation, particularly since the bunker has been compromised and cordoned off. But can you give us any sense? There are so many people watching now who must have loved ones down in that area and are concerned of the systematic...
My heart goes out to them. I've never seen anything like this. I was there from shortly after it happened and saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. It's a horrible, horrible situation. And all that I can tell them is that every resource that we have is attempting to rescue as many people as possible. And the end result is going to be some horrendous number of lives lost. I don't think we know yet. But right now, we have to just focus on saving as many people as possible.
Can you give us a sense of if there is, in fact, some system being implemented, what that system is, and where people are being taken?
People are triaging. People are being taken to every area hospital possible, even virtually within minutes. I drove down right past St. Vincent's Hospital, and I could see them actually on the street ready to take people, and that was within minutes of the first airplane hitting the World Trade Center. So the hospitals are ready. We'll be moving them to all different area hospitals, triaging them. The main thing is having those streets open so that we can get people in and out of the southern part of Manhattan as quickly as possible so that we can move them, to hospitals all over the city.
And Mayor Giuliani, we'll let you...
in place. They're doing it. We just need the cooperation of people in getting out of there.
We'll let you get back to the operations there, and we do appreciate you taking the time for us here.
But once again, the only thing to do now is to remain calm and try to assist in the rescue effort.
Thank you.
And let's pray.
That's New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani talking to a CNN affiliate New York One here, saying that clearly there's going to be tremendous number of lives lost on these attacks here in New York, urging people to stay calm and to leave the area calmly. The area is in the southern part of Manhattan, way down on the tip of Manhattan Island. The mayor urging people to calmly move north. CNN's Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon. Jamie, why don't you start, if you can, at the beginning here as we try and put some order to all of this. What happened?
Well, let me just describe the scene that we have here, and I'll back up a little bit. But right now I'm looking at the charred facade of the Pentagon, a huge gaping hole on the side where the Pentagon heliport is located, the side that faces Arlington Cemetery. In front of me is a long line of rescue personnel with backboards. They're just waiting for victims to be brought out so they can rush them to nearby medical facilities. I see a few victims being treated on the grass outside the Pentagon. Firefighters continue to pour streams of water onto the side of the building, and a huge black cloud of smoke continues to billow out. It is a scene of utter destruction here. I'm sure it pales in comparison to the World Trade Center, but I've never seen anything like this myself in the history of the Pentagon. There's been nothing like this. Again, a huge gaping hole. You can see the exposed 5 floors of the Pentagon offices just ripped apart. Our report is that an aircraft of some kind, and at least one witness identified it as a civilian aircraft, hit the side of the building shortly after the incident in the World Trade Center this morning. People who were in their offices nearby reported hearing a huge explosion, seeing shards of shrapnel come by their window. The entire Pentagon has been evacuated. Short time after this attack, there were urgent announcements made over the loudspeaker telling people to quickly get away from the building because they had reports of a second plane heading this way just 2 minutes away. F-16 jets were scrambled over the Pentagon. I saw several of them go by, but no second plane ever materialized. and the building remains completely evacuated as firefighters continue to pour columns of water on the devastated side of the Pentagon, and rescue personnel continue to whisk victims away. We have no report at this time of how many casualties. Clearly, dozens and dozens of people have been hurt, and we presume that there have been some deaths as well. It's hard to imagine otherwise, considering the extent of damage at the side of the building. And I can see just some of the windows beside a stretch of the building, perhaps 40 or 50 feet wide. This looks like it has collapsed under the weight of the impact. Aaron?
Jamie, thank you. So we have planes hitting the Pentagon, or plane hitting the Pentagon, 2 planes hitting the World Trade Center's towers in New York. Alan Dodd-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Aaron, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sabga and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is covered with thick white ash and building material. The ambulances have been coming now from as far as Long Island. All the rescue workers are being equipped with gas or face filter masks, and firefighters have been arriving even by pickup truck. Otherwise, the streets are now deserted.
Alan, thank you. Alan Dodd-Frank in Manhattan. A little more on this plane crash, which is the 4th incident, if you will. There was the plane crash at the Pentagon, crashing into the Pentagon. There were the 2 planes that hit the World Trade Center here in New York. And we don't know whether this 4th one is related or not, but the report is that a 747 en route from Chicago to New York City crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's the incident. That's what we are hearing.
And I'm standing next to a fireman. He said, yeah, they just bombed the Pentagon, too.
Our colleague, Jeff Green, well, we have a little more sound here from witnesses.
I work the fire alarm company. The doorman goes to me, wow, I never seen a plane flying so low. And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know.
Get down! What's happening? She's been waiting for another explosion!
I was in B Tower. A Tower.
What floor were you on?
B1.
What floor?
The first one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out, his skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement. Came down. All of a sudden, the elevator blew up. Smoke. I dragged the guy out. His skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Thank you.
The words of some of the witnesses here in Manhattan this morning, and the pictures of what will, I suspect, before this is over, go down as one of the most horrific days in our lifetime. We're joined by our colleague, CNN's Jeff Greenfield.
Aaron, you know, in 1993, when terrorists bombed the World Trade Center, their plan was to knock one of the towers into the other, bringing them both down. That disaster was averted, and bad as that was, in a sense, America was lucky. Another terrorist attack in the planning was interrupted to blow up the Lincoln Tunnel and submerge dozens, maybe hundreds of people. At the eve of the millennium, a suspected terrorist, was intercepted, you remember, at the Canadian border on his way to Seattle. And I know that not so long ago, former President Clinton, in a private talk to a group, ruminated on how lucky the United States has been over the years with the combination of luck and the skill of anti-terrorist people, to avoid such things. What we are seeing now is nothing less than the worst nightmare that one could imagine come to life, probably worse than anyone could have imagined. You may remember that Tom Clancy wrote a novel that ends with a terrorist hijacker crashing into the Capitol. The worst act of terrorist violence on American soil, the Oklahoma City bombing, killed fewer than 200 people. All we know today is that tens of thousands of people worked in that complex that has been destroyed. And I hate to say it this way, but this may be the day that America's luck ran out.
Well, it is hard, isn't it? I mean, you look out here, and you see the Statue of Liberty to the right, and these buildings off to the left, the attacks on Washington. We don't know a lot about who's behind this or what this is all about, but the symbolism of these attacks is extraordinary. CNN's David Ensor is in Washington, and he joins us. David?
Aaron, I'm talking to U.S. officials who are obviously working on who is responsible for this. Their working thesis is that this is overseas terrorism, not domestic. They say they cannot rule out additional attacks yet to come. In terms of claims of responsibility, so far, there is an Agence France-Presse report in which a group with the word Palestine in the name claims responsibility. There is also a report quoting personnel close to Osama bin Laden, the fugitive Saudi accused terrorist, denying that that group was involved. But again, U.S. officials say they can't shed any light on whether these reports are correct or incorrect. Usually when this kind of attack occurs, you have claims of responsibility from all sorts of people who had nothing to do with it. So it's a very fluid situation at this point. But the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States has been evacuated from its headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There are some key personnel still in the headquarters, but the operations center has been moved elsewhere. U.S. officials saying they don't want to talk about where exactly the headquarters staff and operations staff has been moved to. But that staff is focusing now on trying to find any shred of information that could help the U.S. government figure out who is doing this and how to put a stop to it. Aaron?
David, you tell me if I'm right or wrong here. As a practical matter, there are not a whole lot of groups that the United States government knows about that are sophisticated enough, have the kind of money, the resources to pull off something like this. Fair enough?
That's absolutely true. And obviously, despite the denial, attention will quickly turn to the bin Laden group because it has long tentacles. It has connections with all sorts of other groups. We saw at the Millennium a group of Algerians apparently involved in trying to arrange bombings in the United States, and now there is evidence being produced in court sessions that those Algerians were working for the bin Laden group. So that group certainly will come under immediate suspicion. There are very few others that could have pulled this off.
Right. I mean, just because of the enormity of it all and the sophistication required to stage these multiple attacks, this is not something some small cell can pull off. This is obviously a group or groups, well-financed and extraordinarily well-organized.
That's correct. Now, another thing you'll notice is that you remember the attack on the USS Cole in the Yemen harbor. That was the first time that kind of an attack using small boats with bombs in them had been used against an American warship. It worked once. Now the U.S. Navy has taken steps to make that much more difficult to do. Officials saying this may work once. They will now have to take measures to try to make sure that this kind of thing can't be done again. But these are apparently hijackings of civilian aircraft. So it was a sort of modus operandi that was dreamed up in some evil terrorist's mind and done on a massive scale here today, Aaron.
The Taliban spokesman.
David, thank you. CNN's David Ensor, our national security correspondent, on what he is hearing, what he knows, what the reports are, as we approach 11:20 Eastern Time. For those of you just joining us, and as you can see on your screen, the Taliban, the government in Afghanistan, expected to make a statement soon, and we'll monitor that for you. For those of you just joining us, let me try and put as many of these pieces together as I can as we stand here in New York. At about 8:45 Eastern Daylight Time this morning, the first of the Trade Center towers was hit by a plane. It crashed into the south side of the tower. About a half an hour later, a second plane came from the right, and you can see it coming behind the first tower, and then it hits the tower, and you'll see the flame and smoke coming out, I guess 3/4, maybe a little more, up the tower. That's where this all began. About a half an hour after that, the first of that tower that is now, you see, in flame there in your shot, collapsed. The top collapsed. And there was an enormous of smoke, sparks, as we looked over from where we're standing. And then a little bit after that, and I want to be careful on time because it seemed perhaps 10 or so minutes, but I'm not sure. The second tower, which in fact was the first one hit, collapsed as well, and that's what you're about to see. Our reporters in the area say they heard loud noises when that happened. It is unclear to them and to us whether those were explosions going on in the building or if that was simply the sound of the collapse of the buildings as they collapsed, making these huge noises as they came down. But as we look back, the smoke now, which has gone from white to a kind of gray, clearing away, we are, I guess, Jeff, I want to know what's behind the smoke, but I have the worst feeling is that very little.
And the fact is that we've already been hearing from even the fragmentary reports from people on the ground, stories beyond horror, people jumping out of windows because of the flames. The fact that this happened shortly before 9 and then the second hit shortly after 9 means that most of the people were either right in the vicinity or actually at their desks. So one doesn't want to be overly grim, but the fact is there were large thousands of people were in these two buildings.
Again, 50,000 people come to work in those buildings. Many thousands more pass through those buildings every day. There are retail shops on the lower floors of the Trade Center.
It is where the PATH trains from New Jersey come in.
Correct. The trains, the commuter trains coming from the other side of the river from New Jersey come in and drop off and pick up their passengers. So it is an extraordinarily busy area. It is also an area, for a number of reasons, rich in symbolism to this city and to the country. You can see from where we are the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor in the scene. So that's what happened in New York. At about the same time, and again, I don't want to put times on much of this yet, after one of these hijacked planes hit the Trade Center in New York, events started to unfold in Washington. A plane hit the Pentagon. And then there was a major fire at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon has now been evacuated. The State Department has been evacuated. The president, who was in Florida, went before cameras.